Hi, welcome to Design Spark Ask the Expert. Today, I've got Graham Smith from Infineon, and we're going to be talking cybersecurity. Hi, Graham. Would you like to say hello to Design Spark?
Hi everybody, my name's Graham Smith. As Greg said, I've been working at Infineon for about 18 months now, and before that I was at Cypress for 12 years. I'm excited to talk to you about security and cybersecurity in general today.
Okay, Graham, cybersecurity obviously is a big topic that everybody should be aware of and people are involved in. But what does cybersecurity mean at the chip context? What does that mean?
Very good question. So I like to describe it as being made up of a number of different elements, but all with the real end goal of making your device or your application function in a known, secure state, ideally with minimal risk to the data integrity and the functionality of your product. Now, that sounds really good, but what does that really mean by that? Well, if you look at device security, it means making sure that your chip or application only ever performs the tasks or the functions that it's intended to do. You don't want it to be able to be made to do something different or to function in a way that's be unexpected or to be malicious. And you can achieve that sort of function, that sort of security and functionality in a variety of different means. So we could be talking about having a root of trust, so knowing that it boots up in a defined known state. It could be things such as hardware anti-tamper solutions to stop anyone physically manipulating with the device, or even just having secure execution environments so that you know that your code is only going to execute in a particular section of that code is only going to execute in a particular secure environment. I think the key from a developer's perspective is understanding where the risks are for your particular product and then designing a system that protects against as many of those things as possible, but ultimately with an acceptable cost and performance level. It doesn't want to be prohibitive, either cost or stop you getting the maximum functionality out of the application itself. The final thing we also have to consider is, we also throw data and then cloud security into the mix as well. And by that, I mean making sure that anything you monitor or sense, or if it's cameras that you're recording, for example, can be stored and protected. It's not accessible to people who want to hack into it or to use it for malicious purposes. And if you're communicating that data to the cloud, that the link between the data, that data transfer is also protected and encrypted, such that you don't get man-in-the-middle type attacks trying to sniff the data, trying to use it to read passwords, or even worse than that. And I think the reality is that probably, I'd say 5 years ago, security was an afterthought for a lot of companies.
Yeah.
The reality, and I think the reality is a lot of them have learned through painful experiences, not just from awareness of their product risks or bad reputations, but costs. There is a physical and monetary cost to security breaches. I think the average cost of a data breach is something in the region of just under $4 million per breach. Now, for your big Googles of the world, you may be able to get away with paying that money and living with that cost. But for a lot of startup companies and a lot of small companies, that could be the difference between making or breaking your actual business model. So I think it really is important that the security is taken more seriously. I think we're getting there, but yeah, it's a real issue still.
Yeah. I think over, you were mentioning 5 years, maybe not taken so strongly over that time, but now certainly people are looking towards cyber. There's been a lot of kind of news events over the last couple of years at least, and people hacking into systems. So what is it that companies need to know about, and what are they designing towards?
I think as security has become more of a mainstream topic, a lot of the industry players have started to define particular standards. So the slide I'll show now has a couple of different standards and topics. If we look at ARM, they developed their PSA certification levels. That's a prime example of looking at security from a microcontroller perspective. And I think the expectation over time is that PSA level 2 will almost become the minimum standard expected level for a lot of IoT applications. And that will give designers a benchmark to say, yeah, as long as we meet in this box, it's going to be ticking everything we need to be doing. And if we need to go above and beyond that, then we'll look at the other PSA level 3s and then whatever comes after that. But also, we're starting to see legislation and regulations driving minimum levels and minimum standards. So it could be the NIST standards or the ETSI security standards, things such as IEC 62443. which is setting, it is almost mandating like a minimum level of security that requires, say, it recommends a hardware trust anchor at level 2, but makes it mandatory from level 3 onwards. And I think if our customers or people designing products use those sorts of standards and regulations as benchmarks, not just at the very least the minimum, but designed to those levels and benchmarks, then at least they'll know that they're going to have a reasonably secure level of security for now, and hopefully they will continue to be secure as tougher standards and measures come in as well. But it's not easy, and it isn't. We hopefully will get to a goal where there will just be almost one tick box standard that says if you tick that, you're done. That's the goal, and then we wait until the next security issue or breach comes along, and those standards develop as time goes on.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you make, is to be aware of the standards, because they do evolve over time due to external influences. So it is important to understand those standards and how to apply them. But from design requirements for a secure device, what are the main requirements for designing a secure device?
I think those design requirements would differ depending on if it's a connected or an unconnected device. So I'll try to cover both sides. I think from a baseline level of requirements, you need your sensitive data and firmware images. They need to be protected. You need to have safeguards in place to prevent the execution of malicious firmware, whether that be firmware rollback update protection or just stopping people reprogramming the devices potentially. You need embedded methods for enforcing security, such as disabling debug and probe access to prevent people physically getting access to data they shouldn't be, back in test labs and stuff like that, and reverse engineering your solutions. Secure boot to make sure that only a defined, trusted application executes. And then typically also you're going to need hardware acceleration to speed up either cryptography functions or encryption, decryption type functions. If we look at connected devices, there's some additional requirements that I typically see alongside that. So a device ID for tracking behavior and giving it some way of modeling it and logging things through different systems. Certification for whether that be enrollment and onboarding to a particular cloud provider, or if it's just for TLS handshakes and connections. And then in those connected products, I tend to see this requirement for the split between an isolated execution environment to minimize your attack surface and ensure that your critical software stacks don't get corrupted and cannot be changed. And they're going to be, I say cannot be changed, cannot be unintentionally changed. There's always firmware, there's always desired firmware updates and new features that will roll out, but having a core set of functionality that doesn't get touched. And I think often to enable that, you need to have unsecure and secure processing environments for things such as trusted firmware M, and then executing that secure firmware. And then you typically do what I always describe as your special application, the bit that makes you. You run that typically in your non-secure processing environments to give you that flexibility to develop your own application. So you want the secure parts to be standard, untouched, unmanipulated by yourselves or by anybody else, and then you keep your special application, as we want to describe it, separately. I think the good news for customers, especially in Infineon customers, is that you can address those needs in multiple different ways, for example. So if you look at microcontroller products, we have our PSoC 64 series, which includes root of trust. So that's provisioned in our HSM by Infineon. And then alongside our trusted firmware M implementation and other hardware functions, such as our cryptography, our eFuses, allow us to reach a PSA level 2 certification. Or if you require, say, hardware anti-tamper features, and you've got a product which is particularly prone from a security perspective to physical breaches, and that could be things like smart locks or industrial robots or industrial machinery, for example, or, God forbid, you wish to use somebody else's microcontroller, then we have our Optiga Trust M products, which can function as a secure, standalone, secure element. And you can put that next to any MCU, traditionally with an I2C interface next to it. Now, those Optiga products require very little modification to an existing design. They can be cut and placed on any microcontroller product or architecture, and they can be used to simply add. You can simply add your root of trust and then provide the start of that chain of trust whilst also offering some of those cryptography functions that we talked about. So things like monotonic counters or true random number generators, whilst also being able to do the TLS security for connectivity-based approaches. The PSoC 64 approach is more of a designing by intention. So you'd be designing your architecture from scratch, essentially, to leverage and implement those MCU features and capabilities. But then you do still get the off-the-shelf security features and so the certification side of that, which is a good combination to be in.
Okay, Graham, we just want to go back a little bit onto PSoC 64. We're talking about, obviously, IoT applications and more connected devices than ever. So what is PO64 for those people who actually don't know at the minute, and what benefits does it bring to users looking to design secure IoT applications?
Of course, I do apologise. I assume everyone knows all about our PSoC products from our conversations. But so PSoC 64 is a derivative of our standard PSoC 6 range. And PSoC 6, for all intents and purposes, is a dual-core MCU product. So we have a Cortex M4F that can run at up to 150 megahertz, and a Cortex M0 Plus that runs up to 100 megahertz. And these products have been designed for always-on sensing applications, HMI, connectivity, and then with the PSoC 64, we've basically added inbuilt device security. Now, the entire PSoC 6 range has versions with and without the hardware cryptography, eFuses for critical code storage, got memory and system protection units to isolate elements of design. But from a microcontroller perspective, it's got a variety of different flash options, so up to 2 megabytes of flash, up to 1 megabyte of SRAM. It's got A to Ds. It's got Cypress's, or now Infineon's, leading end CapSense technology. And then we've got a variety of different products with either embedded Bluetooth Low Energy in there, or with an SDIO and a UART interface to our own combo Wi-Fi and Bluetooth modules. The difference between, say, a PSoC 6.2 series and a PSoC 64 is that with a standard PSoC 6, the user has to develop and implement their own security framework. So we give you all the capabilities, we give you the hardware features and the software features to be able to do that, but you do have to roll your own security framework. Whereas with the PSoC 64 solution, that all comes pre-provisioned from Infineon. And again, even within that 64 range, there's a couple of different versions. So we have a secure boot version where the root of trust certificate and keys are provisioned in our secure HSM and then transferred over to the OEM in a secure manner. And then we also have our standard secure products, which has the same root of trust, but then also adds in what we term our cloud security features, which would be specific to a particular cloud vendor. So currently we have support for Amazon's AWS solutions. We do have plans for other cloud vendors over time, but AWS is still by far and away the most common and popular demand request that we're seeing. And the benefit of that solution is that the provisioning of things in AWS terminology and then onboarding them to the cloud happens, I paraphrase this from a colleague of mine, automagically to simplify the design process. For those of you who have seen Infineon at Embedded World, that's an ex-colleague of ours, Alan Hawes, used to use the automagically phrase.
Oh, Alan,
yeah. So people will know him if they've seen him. But in the P64 device, what we essentially have done is we've used the M0 Plus core as our secure execution environment. So this is where TFM takes over the execution after the secure boot process, sets any of the memory protection requirements and the cryptography elements that may be needed before and only then allowing and starting execution of the M4 core. So your M4 core is typically what we term your non-secure processing element, and that runs your application code. So if it doesn't get through that boot process and doesn't find that it's in the secure state or everything's in the way it should be, your code will never start to execute. So at least then we're preventing and locking down access where it's not, where it shouldn't be happening.
Great.
And as I said, this architectural approach has now allowed us to achieve PSA level 2 certification, and we'll be updating a lot of the collateral may still just say PSA level 1. And we hope maybe that the potential to go beyond level 2 in the future as well.
Okay. Yeah, I know PSoC 64, very successful product for you guys, also successful for RS, and we have covered it on Design Spark in the past. So it's we can read up back on previous articles about PSoC 64. You were just mentioning PSA level 1 and 2. What are the main differences between those levels?
So level 1 is the base level. So that's mainly aimed at, from a description perspective, it's mainly aimed at the device vendors, so the likes of Infineons, and involves a bit of question answer, a bit of dialogue between ourselves and a test lab, as well as an interview. So essentially, the answers need to be accompanied by explanatory notes, and also needs to be marked and aligned with particular IoT standards and laws. So it's more of a paperwork exercise, that one, than anything else. It's not really. It's making sure things are designed with the right intention. Level 2, and as I touched on, we believe this is where the majority of IoT applications are going to end up. Is essentially a test lab reviews the source code and the root of trust over typically a 1-month period, and they check against carefully defined attack methods to make sure that there's no vulnerabilities, and if there, God forbid, there were, they would document those, and you go back and change your architecture to address them. And then once that's done, it ensures you basically then ensure that your device supports and follows the PSA root of trust functionality.
Yeah.
There is an extension that's a level 3, extends the level 2 sort of clarity by adding physical protection from side channel or direct physical attacks. And I think the reality is that tends to be more for industrial or communal area products, as I said, where you can be physically vulnerable to lots of bypassing people, or it's in a potentially vulnerable location. So smart lock is a great example. People can go up to an outside of a lock, try to physically hack it to manipulate it, open the door, break into wherever you're going to go. So that tends to be more focused on particular areas. I think, and this is an opinion rather than, I would say, an industry fact, for personal or home appliance-based applications, that's unlikely to occur. If someone's physically hacking into my washing machine or my oven, I've got other concerns about them being in my house in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah.
That would be the major issue. And even then, if the worst case they're going to get is my Wi-Fi passwords and access, like most people, I'm still using probably the ones that are written on the back of the router. So there's going to be other things that are at risk in that area.
Yeah.
For those customers or for those designers who do feel that you may need to extend the security that PSoC 64 offers, then the good thing is we do have our Optiga Trust M products that do offer that physical protection. It's outside of the PSA framework as such, but it's giving you the same benefits. So you could say, for example, pair a PSoC 64 with its PSA level 2 certification with an Optiga Trust M device externally, and then achieve the same overall level of protection. There's many ways to skin the same cat, shall we say, but that's how you could address that if you do feel that's a mandatory requirement.
Okay, so on your Optiga Trust M products, you mentioned that you can simply add those to applications to provide that kind of chain of trust, root of trust. But you also mentioned that they provide secure, fast, and easy access to major cloud service providers thanks to personalization certificates. So a pre-personalized turnkey solution. Could you just explain exactly what that is?
Yeah, of course. So I think we touched on, like, the root of trust is the foundation of any security architecture. So it has to be immutable, has to perform a set of functions such as measurement, logging, things like that. Now, as I said, we have some of those functions on the PSoC 64 devices, but not all MCUs do. And this is one area we say where a dedicated device can easily be added to the root of trust, and then extend that chain of trust as we go through. So once you have that that chain of trust, it can be tied and related to tasks. So don't start this task until we've verified that this previous task has been completed. Or it could be that you use, say, the Trust M device for crypto acceleration or on-the-fly encryption to again offload MCU requirements. To establish the root of trust, that device needs to be provisioned in a secure provisioning environment. And this is something that Infineon does as part of its pre-production, or as part of its production process. And essentially what happens is, with the Optiga products, we generate a unique X509 certificate for each customer, and then provision the Trust M device with it. So this certificate can have all of the cloud providers' details, all the all the security policies and keys that are associated with, say, AWS, plus any other required values that you want to add from an individual perspective. And then in an application, this then extends that trust and allows the secure login and authentication firmware updates. And I've got the slide that we'll show now, essentially explains how then they get used to extend that root of trust and the chain of trust through the process.
Great. So in terms of the Optiga Trust, you've got a wide range of security features there. What applications are we looking at? Are we going from the consumer application all the way through to the industrial?
More so the industrial applications. So as I briefly touched on, the secure element anti-tamper features that really set the Optiga Trust M apart are used where security is key, but access is unrestricted. So smart door locks, security cameras, air conditioning units, which are typically hung on the back wall of the building and in the dark alley where no one ever goes or should be going. And essentially where many people could physically access or come close to the device, but you either want to restrict the access, blocks, or content, cameras, passwords. So I think that's a core market, and I think that's really self-explanatory. We also see use cases in industrial applications where conformity and non-performance is key. So if I use robots in a manufacturing plant or a process, you don't want that device to be in an unverified status. You don't want it to have been updated automatically by just if you look at your Windows laptops, how they get updated just randomly in the background and something breaks. You don't want that with a robot. You want to make sure it's done at a known time in a known process, and it's not mid-operation, or it's not it could be something that could be life-threatening or plant ruining. So you don't want that sort of malfunction. So, and again, we can use the root of trust functions to make sure that everything is verified and authenticated before happening. And although I said I don't really see it being used in like my oven or my microwave or the washing machine type environments, we do see use cases in white goods. A lot of times, either retroactively or by design. And there's two reasons for this. So one typically is that they need some security or some extra functionality. So whether it's just the cloud security part of that, for example, and a lot of their products may have been designed with cost optimized particular needs or to do a particular set of functions, so lack the physical resources to have that root of trust on the chip, and they don't want to go away and redesign their entire architecture just to have an extra root, just to have that root of trust. So having an external chip that they can put down next to that means it's minimal board spins. They can extend the lifetime of an existing architecture or platform, but still make sure they're up to date with the latest security features. And that also helps from a design flexibility perspective. So I say as standards change, and they find out that what was working and what was compliant before maybe isn't, having an external chip and just changing one element, in this, pardon the pun in that phrase, means that it gives them, again, greater flexibility, reduced manufacturing costs, reduced overheads, and they can make sure that as their life cycles go on, they can still be as secure as they need to be and deal with changing requirements. And so I think we're in that unique situation now where security is well known, is proving why it's important, and the standardization, and as we're going to see more and more standards come, having that flexibility to just say, actually, well, I just need the latest version of that chip rather than I have to change my entire MCU architecture to something new, means that it's just a de-risk solution for a lot of customers. So I think secure products, locks, cameras is a core market. Industrial applications and then design flexibility will be the two others. But hopefully we'll see more and more customers deploy known solutions and not take risks unnecessarily with their products and architectures.
Great. Graham, it's been fantastic to talk to you today to learn a little bit more about cybersecurity, but also the Optiga Trust M products. You were talking there about flexibility and ease in design and future-proofing. That sounds a really interesting product. So I'd just like to thank you for your time today, and hopefully we can join you with Design Spark sometime soon.
Always a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.